In the final segment, we're going to consider the geopolitical ramifications, famously not something you can do in a minute. We're going to give people a taster and a hook to hang their thoughts on, shall we say. In short, the United States and France, both reliable old allies of Armenia because of the huge diasporas of Armenians in both countries, have stepped into the breach, really, much more than Britain. Famously in 1917 or even 1915, during the first days of the Armenian massacres in what was then the Ottoman Empire, Prime Minister Lloyd George said, well, we have the world's best navy, but sadly His Majesty's ships cannot climb Mount Ararat, as a get-out clause for doing nothing. So the French and Americans, both diplomats on the ground and many church-based relief efforts, did a lot more, both in-country and when Armenians reached the shores of France and the USA, hence the large communities there. But this takes the unlikely form now of Samantha Power, known to many of our viewers for her standoffs with the late Vitaly Churkin when they were the respective permanent representatives of their nations in the UN Security Council. Here, Samantha Power is playing it cool. I know she's not everyone's cup of tea on this channel, understandable reasons, but here she's standing in the Lachin corridor on the border between Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia proper, and she gets interrupted. We will give a verbatim account of the interruption if people cannot hear it in the clip, but obviously tempers are fraying. She claims she's no longer a power diplomat. She's just an aid coordinator. I don't really buy that. But she's been dispatched because the State Department, obviously, and Washington generally, is keen to show that it won't put up with this. The current issue, of course, is getting people out. Whether the US and France then say, okay, the territory's been denuded of ethnic Armenians, they've been forced out of their homes, but they have now a case in law to declare independence in a way that international would recognize, is open to question. So here is Samantha Power in her new capacity as head of USAID, talking at the border between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh.
There are still tens of thousands of ethnic Armenians who are there living in very vulnerable conditions. And already you are seeing as well the gathering of testimonies from people who have fled violence, deprivation, and with the fear of living under the government of Azerbaijan.
Sanction Azerbaijan or go back to your country. You don't care, stop the lies.
Our focus, again, right now, and I'm USAID administrator, is meeting the humanitarian needs of individuals in really vulnerable circumstances and looking out for and securing access to individuals who are either unable to proceed on the corridor because it is blocked with traffic, or in some cases too scared to make the journey to where we are today.
For anyone who didn't catch it, the angry words in the background at the press conference were, sanction Azerbaijan or go back to your country. You don't care. Stop lying. Well, Georg, you take a more positive view of Samantha Power, or perhaps more of her earnest than I would. But why are the US and France physically present? Just even as turns up in Nakhichevan, evidently planning to try to bulldoze a hole through Armenia proper, in the Zangezur corridor in Syunik. Why is it that, okay, not just the Americans and the French are getting interested, but as I understand your analysis, even Britain, historically pro-Azeri in this, see our previous podcast in the show notes on that, gold, guns and gas, a pre-cooked soft British power ceasefire. Why is it that all of the Western allies, particularly the UN Security Council Permanent 3 in the West, are making a big on Armenia now?
Well, Alex, I wouldn't necessarily say that I take a more positive view on Samantha Powell than you do. You've mentioned earlier that none of us are impartial, as it were, because you can't be just neutral. But just as well as you are, I'm attempting to be on the side of what I believe to be the truth. And if the truth comes from Samantha Powell, then that's what I'm going to say to be the truth. She's not my favorite person, but never mind. Now, of course, Armenia is becoming crucially important geopolitically because of precisely this tiny bit of the area that connects Armenia to Iran. We have indeed talked about it in our podcast, but now this has become an acute and a very serious problem. The whole concept of what's going on is that we now are on the verge of another Axis and allies forming in this our modern day and age. And part of the Axis would be Turkey, Azerbaijan, China, and the Central Asian Stan countries, and that would be the line of trade and oil export and gas export that would securely cut Iran and India off from the international trade in a very significant way. But that's not Europe's interest, and that's not the British interest. That's not the American interest. It is in the interest of China, and it's in the interest of Russia, because that way Russia would control a great segment of trade coming from China into Europe and further west, and then Turkey and Azerbaijan would be Russia's aides and Russia's allies in making sure that there's no way to evade Russia other than going through Turkey and Azerbaijan. So they're playing it together. Whereas on the other hand, there is this new goal and the new program that is being implemented gradually, and that is the establishment of the trade route from India through Iran, Armenia, Georgia, and further into Europe. And of course, we see that with the British politics and the American politics, we see that there is a growing support in the West for developing India and boosting India as a counterbalance to China. And even Rishi Sunak, in his early days in the parliament, or as the head of the as the prime minister, he said that our golden age of friendship with China is over. That's not a direct quotation, but that's something that he said. That's the essence of what he said. And that's, of course, because now Britain and Europe, including France and Germany and the United States, they're now trying to boost Indian trade through Iran, Armenia, Georgia into Europe. And that is directly contrary to that other idea, because the other idea is to cut off that tiny region of Armenia, control it. The Russians want to control it, and the Turks want to control it, and they agreed to have a shared interest there. So whoever wins, basically, if it is the Russians and the Turks versus the West, then they are going to be holding the West hostage in terms of the trade between the East and the West. And if the West is able to secure Armenia as a secure place for transportation of goods and for trade, a trade hub like that, then of course the West is going to make sure that it is independent of any pressure from either Russia or China in terms of any of the transportation of goods, and potentially the West is going to be able to control gas and oil trade coming from the Central Asian states into the West through controlling them, or by controlling them through Armenia, through holding some upper hand over them by having influence in Armenia. So that's the context of why these people want to help right now.
Thank you very much, Georg. Not easy to summarize in a main news segment, but we'll go into more detail in extra.
Thank you, Alex. Right, look, we are just going to move on to